My name is Carrie Owens. I am the Community Animal Training Coordinator for San Diego Humane Society. I am a certified professional dog trainer, and reactivity is my passion. I'm just so happy you all can join me today. My hope is that by going over the topics that we do, we can give you and your dog a better connection on leash. We will be starting off with how to prepare for the walk. So what you should do before you even leave the house, what equipment should you have, what skills should you acquire. We're going to go over what the causations of these behaviors are. Why is this happening? Why is it continuing to happen? We're going to go over how to recognize these stress signals that lead up to these reactive behaviors. Lastly, we're going to go over how to create calm walks to kind of start opening that door, start taking those first steps. So what equipment should we have before we even leave the house? Let's make sure we're prepared. I do like to have just a regular 6-foot leash. I do like them better kind of than those shorter leashes. They can be safer if your dog is going to move sporadically. You don't really want them directly in that line of path. The average human step is about 2 feet long, and the medium-sized dog is about 27 inches long. So if you only have 4 feet of leash, you can run out of room really quickly. So I like that full 6 foot of leash and just be safer and maybe a little less frustrating for your dog. We do want to avoid those retractable or those flexing leashes. We will want just kind of that set leash for the leash handling skills that we're going to be practicing when walking a dog who tends to have reactive behaviors. Attached to that leash, I would be recommending a harness. It's just better to have that pressure, if it is going to be applied to your dog, to be dispersed as opposed to centralized. So if the pressure can be dispersed around that cavity as opposed to centralized around the neck, that can avoid discomfort, pain, which can lead to the behaviors that we're seeing already, can lead to them happening more. But it can also avoid any type of injury. Specifically, I do like a front clipping harness. You can find what are called no-pull harnesses. Do not let that name fool you. There is no tool that is going to train your dog. So just because you put a no-pull harness on your dog does not mean that they will stop pulling. It's just a term. Traditionally, what it means is that the leash will be clipped to the front of the dog. So what you see here in the graphic, the dog to the left-hand side has that leash clipped to their chest. And the harness that would be to the right-hand side, you will see actually loops on the back of the harness, so what would run along the dog's spine, as well as in the front. So we just like that front clipping harness, and we're going to talk about why when we talk about how to achieve loose leash walking. But it's going to be very, very helpful. It kind of just disperses the weight evenly to make it safer to control and maintain safety of that leash.
Carrie, we did have a question about a gentle leader.
I like to use the front clipping harness first. It tends to be a little bit more comfortable for your dog. What we tend to see with the gentle leader is they're really focused on the strapping around their snout, which is a very sensitive area, has a lot of nerve endings. So they kind of like try to get it off or might rub themselves on you or on the ground. The other thing I'll mention too is if it is attached to your dog's face and their neck, if they do tend to whip a lot, that can possibly cause injury. So just having something attached to the body as opposed to, once again, anywhere sensitive like the neck area, that's something that I would recommend starting off with. So we have that leash, we have that harness, and we want it properly fitted. So always follow instructions on the package, but also do the 2-finger rule. Ensure that you can fit 2 fingers underneath between your dog's body and the strap, and not be able to pull any excess space between the body and the strap. Making sure that there's no excess there. They cannot slip their elbow out or possibly get out of that harness. So safety first, make sure it's properly fitted. We're also going to want a treat pouch. Thanks to the Europeans who recently brought the fanny pack back, woot woot, making us trainers look in style now. So you can use a fanny pack, you can use a training pouch like you see here on the slide. They make some really cool silicone ones. So if you want to clean them a little bit easier, just kind of a quick wipe. Something I recommend avoiding is putting those treats in your pocket. It only takes one laundry load to learn that we shouldn't do that anymore because they get stuck in there, and it's hard to get them out of our pocket too when we need them. So that training pouch really comes in handy. So there are different levels of training treats. Low-level training treats would probably be like the training treats themselves, as like 2 calorie per pop training treats. Medium value would be kind of those higher value dog treats. So those moist, kind of stinky dog treats that might be a little bit more higher end. And then the high value stuff is going to be that dog safe human food. So always keep in mind your dog's personal health, diet, GI tract, and how that works, and take that into consideration. But breaking out those high values, things like cream cheese, boiled chicken, other boiled meats that have no sodium in them, lunch meat, hot dogs, things of that nature, kind of giving your dog an offer that they can't refuse because tensions are high. And of course, don't forget those poop bags too. Now that we have our equipment, we're ready to go. No, I'm just kidding. We're not ready. We still got lots of prep to go. Let's get comfortable handling that equipment. So having a good grip on the leash is very important for safety. Let's talk about how to hold that leash. So we have some demos up in front of us where you can have what's called a microphone grip on the leash. The first option is where you let that leash hang over your thumb, like in that first picture all the way to the left. What your hand would do is come all the way around, grip, and kind of hold it as if you were holding a microphone. We're not going to be holding it up to our mouth, of course, though. We will actually be holding it into our core, and we'll talk about that more in a second. But that first option is letting that loop leash be over the thumb, once again, holding it in like a microphone, so that nice tight grip. The second option is to put the loop over the palm as opposed to the thumb. And then same grip, that microphone where you clasp in and you kind of hold it like this, once again, like a microphone. The third option that you have is to do the loop on the wrist. So you have the loop go over the wrist, like in that third picture, all the way to the right. And then we have a hand clamping. The idea is that if there was pressure ever applied to the leash, it would never get stuck on the hand or the wrist. It would never possibly drag you or break any bones. As I mentioned before, once we have that nice grip on the leash, we're going to hold it into our core. The core is the strongest part of your body. It's also the center of gravity. So what happens when you get pulled from the middle of your body is that your knees might go down first. But if you get pulled when your arm is away from your body, your arm's going to go out, your shoulder's going to follow it, and your head's going to be next. So hold it into your core for that really safe hold of the leash and some good control there. We are going to want to avoid applying pressure to the leash. This can cause stress on our dog's body, so we are going to try to avoid it. We're going to give you some ways that you can avoid it. We're not going to say don't do it and say good luck. We know that the two main reasons why folks apply pressure to the leash are either to communicate with their dog or to shorten the leash so that their dog doesn't have as much room. So right now what we're going to do is talk about methods and skills that we can build to either shorten the leash when we need it or communicate with our dog when we need it without applying pressure to that leash. We don't want to be wrapping the leash around our hand. We have lots of tiny bones in that hand, and if there's a lot of pressure that's applied to it, they can break. We want to avoid that as much as we can. So we don't want to be shortening the leash by taking it and wrapping it, around that hand. So a really good way to shorten the leash is what's called the accordion. This is a really good method to use if you have lots of time between what you need to shorten the leash for, between you and that. So, something's coming up in the distance. I don't really want my dog to have the full length of the leash. I've got plenty of time. This is a really good method to shorten the leash that only takes possibly one hand, depending on how big your hand is. My hands are small, so it does take two. But this is one way that you can shorten the leash. You're simply going to kind of pick up the leash in this accordion fashion so that it fits all in one hand, kind of scrunched up. You'll see it demoed in this video here.
Shorten the leash would be to accordion it. So if you take the leash, you grab here, you come up, you come down, you come up, you come down, you come up, you come down, and then you hold that bunch into your core. You can let go, but now you've essentially made the leash about 1 foot to 2.5 feet long.
So we'll see that again.
So another.
So I'm holding it into my core. I do like the hold over my palm. I pick up the leash, I pick it down in that accordion fashion. I hold it into my core. I have that bunch. I can let a couple rings go to make it maybe, 4 feet instead of the 2 that I have. I can let the whole thing go. But that's a really good way to shorten the leash without wrapping it around your wrist. It's a really nice kind of half motion too, if you're used to wrapping it around your wrist. That movement of kind of grabbing the leash going down, if you will, is very similar to the motion we make when we're about to wrap it around our wrist. So maybe we can start being mindful. Oop, I'm about to wrap it. I should start coordinating instead. Another way that you can shorten the leash is what we call walking up the leash. This is where you are going to slide your free hand down the leash. You are going to lock that free hand in, and then you're going to walk yourself into the clamp that you have locked in. That sounds really complicated. I promise it's not. It looks very much like you're just looping an extension cord in, but you'll be walking yourself into the excess of the leash, and that can be demoed here.
How you're going to walk up a leash. You're going to take your free hand, slide it down the leash, you're going to lock it in, and then you're going to walk into it. You can hold the leash with 2 different hands into your core, or you can loop it in to your belly button with the same hand and have that extra hand here. And now the leash is only about 1.5 feet long.
So those are a couple of ways that you can shorten the leash without ever having to pull back on your dog, right? You're not playing that game of tug of war where you're slowly feeding yourself into them against their body weight. You can kind of reach forward, grab the leash, lock in, and then walk yourself in so your dog doesn't have to feel that pressure. So we said the other reason why folks might be using the leash, applying pressure to the leash, is to communicate. So we're going to talk here about how to build loose leash walking. Typically, we use that leash to say, hey, I want you to come over here, or I want you to stop, come back. Let's talk about how we can get our dog to walk with us and kind of walk beside us, increasing those check-ins. So we're going to see an exercise here called the wedding march game. It's where we are going to treat the dog that we're working with at the hip as they move with us. At home, I do recommend you starting off. Start without the leash as well, possibly reaching for that leash and leashing your dog up in the living room can be really confusing, can make them a little bit more excited, and we can see a lack of focus. Teaching them this exercise without the leash can really help them pick up on what the exercise is before you introduce the leash, and then we can kind of go from there. But to give you all a demo of what this exercise looks like where we treat the dog while walking with us at our hip, we have this video here. So as I take a step forward and she walks with me, I'm giving that treat right at what would be my knee. It's not quite as tall as my hip. And then the next step that we're going to see here is what it looks like after we've been practicing. So I can take about 5 to 6 steps before I reinforce her with that treat at my knee. So we can see that again for you all. So she's behind me. I'm going to take a step forward. I have that treat right there for her, letting her know that that is where I would like her. And that's going to increase the likelihood of her staying beside me. There's a lot of value in staying right next to me. And she's going to increase the frequency of seeing. So she's going to start doing that a lot more often. So practicing this inside the home with a leash. Once we've got inside the home with a leash, we can start practicing in a slightly more distracted area, like right outside of the home. And we can start building those loose leash behaviors. This is also going to be building check-in behaviors, right? If every step we take, we're looking up for that treat, we're going to be anticipating, we're going to be checking in with you. You know, are you going to need that treat? Are you going to talk to me, right? You become very important on the walk, which is what we want. We want that behavior to be built that we check in often. So this is how we build loose leash walking behavior. Let's talk about what we do when we see that old behavior rear its head, right? We all know that when we're building a new behavior, the old one still kind of hangs around because behavior is habitual. So what do we do when we see the old behavior, and how do we continue building this new one? So that's where we're going to talk about what's called Premax principle. Premax principle is what I like to do if my dog does apply pressure to the leash. So if my dog walks and goes to the end of that leash, what I'm going to do is stop. This is where we talk about harnesses and pulling. So behavior is functional, especially for dogs. For humans, it's a little bit more moral-based, right? Is this right or wrong? As well as functional, of course, does it always work? But for animals, it's functional. So just does this work? And if pulling does achieve forward movement, well, that behavior works. And I'm probably going to do that behavior more in the future. So what we want to do is simultaneously teach what behavior does work while actively teaching that the old behavior does not. So pulling is not going to achieve forward movement anymore. In fact, pulling is going to equal stop. Pulling does not work to move forward anymore. What we are teaching, though, is that loose leash walking, so having slack on the leash and checking in, is what equates having that forward movement. And let me kind of put a little asterisk to this, that when our dog is applying pressure to the leash, this is when they are just simply pulling towards an inanimate object, if you will. So the fire hydrant that smells good, the bush or the grass, something of that nature. This isn't when they're pulling towards something that they want to react towards. But that behavior is functional. I want to get to that thing. And so if we teach them that loose leash walking or checking in with us, it's what gets them to that fire hydrant. That's the behavior they're going to use the next time they are exposed to something that's very exciting. So what it looks like is the dog goes to the end of the leash. I stop. I wait for one of those behaviors to look at me, to put slack on the leash. Once I see one of those behaviors, I immediately start walking towards what it was that they wanted. I affectionately call this eating your vegetables before getting your dessert. So it's essentially the child that's reaching their hand into the cookie jar and you going, oops, just have a piece of broccoli first, and then now you can have your cookie. So let's see what this looks like in real life. So here's my dog going to the end of the leash. I entice them to check in with me. The second that they do, I allow them to move forward. We had a treat on the ground, so of course that's what they wanted to move forward towards. So they were pulling. The second that they stopped, they looked at me. We immediately started walking towards that item. So once again, this works towards not the things that make your dog react. This works towards just the things that they experience on the walk that they might be doing. So something else that we want to be doing along our walk to increase that communication. So when my dog does eventually see something that they might be reacting to, I can call their name and quickly get them to turn towards me. It's not this kind of foreign thing that we only do once in a while. Hey, we do this quite often. And even when there's something super distracting, it's pretty autopilot. We practice this often. So we want to do that. We want to reinforce those voluntary check-ins, or we want to be asking for check-ins variably throughout the walk. So saying your dog's name. If they don't look at you after the first time that you say their name, do me a favor, don't repeat it 1,000 times. Don't stop the walk either. It's okay. You can make some funny sounds to try to get their attention, and then you can still reinforce them for that. It doesn't necessarily need to be their specific name. It just needs to be orienting towards you. But say their name. If they don't respond, say some silly sounds. If they don't respond, fine, we'll try again later. Ask for that check-in to start increasing that's what walks look like now, right? Walks look like I randomly ask for you to look at me. That's what walks include now. And your dog will most likely start doing it on their own. The reason why is because we're going to reinforce the behavior so that it increases the likelihood of them doing it on their own. Reinforcers include treats and food, pretty obvious, but also includes praise and affection, and behaviors like sniffing, and toys. So if the dog is biting on the leash, something else you can do is try to offer a toy. I wouldn't do so in a very, very exciting way. You don't want to overstimulate them, but it can be something that we can possibly swap out. So can you please bite on the toy as opposed to biting on the leash? But your dog gets to choose their reinforcer in that moment. So I've definitely seen a dog who's food motivated just be on a hot trail, be on a hot scent, where I asked them to check in with me. I had a treat ready. They looked at me, they saw a treat, they go, that's great. And they kept sniffing. And that was their way of reinforcing that behavior. They wanted to sniff more than they wanted the treat. And that was totally fine. So sniffing is a really reinforcing behavior for your dog. Definitely let them do that. We'll talk more about it. But let your dog pick their reinforcer. So if your dog's uncomfortable with being touched on the walk, maybe affection's probably not the best reinforcer. Maybe we can use things like treats, maybe praise, and sniffing. Okay, so now that we have the right equipment, we're feeling comfortable with it. Let's look at what these check-ins look like, right? It's pretty obvious in this dog, but sometimes check-ins is kind of like, where's Waldo, when you don't know what Waldo looks like. Sometimes they just happen right under our nose and we don't even know it. So here's a quick little glimpse of what voluntary check-ins look like. You'll see that we're following, we're looking at me, we look at the walk, we look at me. So those little quick glances, those little quick lookups, those little quick head turns, We don't want to take those for granted. We definitely want to let the dog know that those behaviors have value, no matter how often or not as often they happen. If we want them to happen often, starting to let them know they're hitting the mark, and that's what we can get, how we can get that to start occurring more. So why are these reactive behaviors happening? In a word, stress. Is it because your dog is bad? No. Is it because your dog wants to be mean? No. It's because your dog is stressed. Stress is a spectrum. It's not just the side that we typically think of as humans, like fear and terror and anxiety and apprehension. It's also the other side of the spectrum, like anticipation, excitement, frustration, over-arousal, and overstimulation. So anywhere on that spectrum, a dog is going to be releasing stress hormones like cortisol. So, the dog that is really excited to meet dogs, if they're really excited to meet dogs and there's no leash, there's nothing holding them back, well, we don't see frustration, we don't feel frustration, so therefore we're not going to see frustrated behaviors. You put that leash on the dog and remove their ability to make options and choices and to see that dog or not, and all of a sudden frustration enters the environment. And when frustration enters the environment, stress hormones release, and we see behaviors based on that. So cortisol is going to cause an increase of heart rate. It's going to cause shallow, rapid breathing. It can cause a suppression of appetite if enough of these hormones have been released in a short period of time. It can cause increase of impulsive decisions and a lack of focus, and a lot of other things as well. But that's what's happening. Your dog is essentially becoming stressed. They are releasing these hormones inside of the body. And the way that these hormones work inside of the body, the lifespan, is very important for us to take into consideration when it comes to setting our dogs up for success. One exposure to something that causes stress in your dog, and we call those triggers. A trigger is anything in the environment that causes the release of stress hormones. Anytime your dog is exposed to just one of those things, it's an hour's worth of cortisol that they will now have to work through. So what happens when your dog is exposed to stressor 1, and then stressor 2, and then stressor 3, and then 4 within the same hour is what we see here in this graph. So just the walk in of itself, super exciting. And then all of a sudden that strange dog that's always off leash runs by. And then the man on the hat, maybe in the construction zone, is over there, and we can see them, and are they gonna come over here? I don't know. And then finally the stranger is like, your dog's real cute, can I say hi? And of course you want to be nice, so you say, yeah, you can pet my dog. And all of a sudden they head whip, right? They go to the person, like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on, I'm so sorry, they're normally really friendly. Well, we've been exposed to one too many things. It's the straw that breaks the camel's back. So earlier when I heard that the dog is, doing multiple different behaviors at once, and then we can't get their focus, to me that sounds like over threshold behavior. And we're going to need some time, an hour, maybe 2, maybe 3, it depends on how many things that they were exposed to, in order to decompress from those stress hormones. And think about how you behave, how you interact with the environment when you're at a heightened state of emotional energy or emotional stress. Trigger stacking is that morning that you look up late and you spill coffee on yourself and you hit traffic and you couldn't find parking, and then all of a sudden there's a small fire at work. Normally any other day, it's no big deal. I've got it. It's okay. But we've already had a day. This is the last thing, and now I'm going to show my behaviors. So being aware as to what causes these behaviors in your dog, or where your dog is in that current moment in relation to their threshold, can really set them up for success, because it's really unreasonable or not fair to ask you to, just suck it up, suppress all of that stress and just mask your behaviors. It's also really not going to work, no matter how much we say that it will. But when we're using treats, what we're doing is more so providing things that make the dog feel better. Because if somebody is in a state of stress, telling them to just knock it off or trying to remove things that make them feel good are actually just going to prolong the behaviors that we're seeing. So adding things into the environment that make them feel good, it's not so much that we're looking as to reinforcing a certain behavior, as much as we're trying to change the cause of that behavior. The behavior is a symptom. So we're not so much worried about the symptom as much as we are worried about treating the causation of that catalyst that's making that happen. Okay, so going further into what causes reactive behavior. So cool, stress is happening internally to your dog. That's what the internal process is that's causing the reactive behavior. What's happening externally? What's happening out there that's causing the reactive behavior? Well, close interactions with something that's stressful is going to create stress. Having long exposures to that thing will create stress. Having frequent exposures and interactions with something stressful will create stress. So we want to be mindful as to where we are in the environment towards other things. And it kind of makes sense if we try to put ourselves in our dog's paws, if you will, whether your dog is excited or fearful. We're going to go with fear. So if I want you to be comfortable around something, let's say sharks. If you're a diver, this isn't going to work for you. But if you're not a diver, this will. Let's say I'm trying to get you comfortable with sharks. Do you want that shark to start 10 feet away from you or 100 feet away from you, right? A lot further away is what's going to get calmer reactions. Do you want to be in the pool with the shark for 10 seconds or 10 minutes? Probably 10 seconds, if any, right? If I can get none, that's what I would want. So 10 seconds, short exposures can lead to less escalated behaviors. The longer I'm in that pool with the shark, the more I'm like, I know it's just going to eat me, just let me out. And I just start having those big behaviors, right? The closer it gets to me, the more I'm just like, it's just doom, right? And then frequency. Do I want one shark in that pool or do I want 10 sharks in that pool with me? Once again, if I even have to get in it, just one. So this is why we're saying that having close interactions with something that causes your dog stress, so having a close interaction with the trigger is going to put them closer to threshold or towards threshold. Having long exposures to that trigger is also going to get them closer to that threshold, if not put them over. And then having frequent exposures is also going to put them closer to that threshold. So this graphic here to the left-hand side is supposed to be depicting not just distance from where you're in that safe zone. You're in that green area with your dog. Everybody is nice and relaxed. They're sniffing the roses. And then you get to that yellow bar where your dog is aware. All of a sudden, they're not sniffing anymore. Their head is perked up. And then maybe they can still see the thing. Maybe this is duration, the amount of time that we're getting depicted right now with this graph. They continue to release the stress and get closer to that bar of reacting the longer they're in that situation. Obviously, the closer they get to that bar as well, that physical distance, and get closer to the trigger that is at the end of that graph there, the more likely they are going to have a reaction because they're releasing more cortisol. And as we saw on the last slide, there's a threshold. There's an end limit to that entity, and there can only be so much before we see the effects. We start to see behaviors because of it. Okay, so now that we know that our dog is stressed out, regardless if they're overly excited or possibly overly stimulated, or if they're fearful or just anxious or anywhere in between, let's talk about what signs our dog shows us to indicate that they're feeling these things internally, whether it's the signs that occur before we see those big signs, or whether they're the big signs themselves. So we have a nice graphic to our left-hand side that shows us the difference between dogs that are just looking at something and dogs that are releasing stress hormones that are what we would consider to be that aware and that alert category, releasing cortisol hormones. So the eyes are going to typically become hard or fixated. They could also have a wide stare. You might see the pupils dilate as well. The mouth is typically going to close and be clenched tight unless vocalizing. That's when we will see an open mouth. You might sometimes see heavy panting as well. But for the most part, right before the dog is reacting, we see that clenched mouth. It's easier for them to hear. It's also something we do, right? We hold our breath. The ears are going to erect on top of the head. So you're going to see the ears, regardless of their shape, whether they flop, whether they go straight up, they're going to move up and they're going to move forward. You will typically see wrinkles on top of the forehead during this time. The tail is going to become stiff regardless of the location. You'll see the dogs down below who are in that aware and that alert position. One dog has their tail up, whereas the other tail is tucked between the legs. Both are extremely stiff and the muscle is very tight, whereas the dogs above, well, the dog to the right above doesn't have a tail, they have a nub, but the one to the left has that tail just kind of naturally going off the body. It is not tucked underneath the body cavity, it is just simply hanging off. But that tight tail, either up or down or right off the body, is an indication that there is muscle tension due to that stress. Tight tail wags is also another sign of stress. So that tail that is only wagging a couple inches to each side, it's very tight and calculated. It's clearly different than that tail that you see when you come home and it's like the motion of the ocean just moving super fast, right? It's very tight and calculated. That's basically fidgeting due to the amount of energy from the cortisol, right? The increase of heart rate, shallow rapid breathing. I gotta fidget, I gotta do something. That's that movement of the tail. It's very stiff though. The body weight is going to be very shifted either forward or away from the trigger. So depending on how your dog feels in that moment, I've seen dogs try to scurry away. I've seen dogs lunge. So that body weight is going to shift. You can see that depicted very dramatically with the dogs down below. You can see even like that slant of the spine, right? But all that weight is forward. And then body movement. Are we flailing? Are we jumping, lunging, flailing, spinning? Are we laying down and refusing to move? That is a sign of hyperfixation or focus, and it is a sign that stress is being released inside the body. Some common vocalizations that we'll see is chuffing, which is the hoof, boofing, which is like the half bark, the boof, whining, growling, snarling, barking, high-pitched or low-pitched. Those are really common behaviors that we see. So recognizing these signals as they start to occur, and sometimes that window is very small, but that's how we can start to reach our dog before they go over that stress threshold. Getting really familiar with their body language can be really helpful in understanding where they are in that moment to the threshold and knowing if we should start turning around and going back home or if we can continue going. So we're going to look at this dog's body language. We're going to look at their signals. Feel free to pop in the chat whatever signals you might see. If you don't see any, that's totally fine. We're all still learning here. But we are going to see this dog veer off to the side and start showing some stiff signs of being aware and alert that there's a trigger is in front. Go ahead and say it again. And I'll do it one more time, and then I'll start checking. Yep, fixation, right? We see a little bit of difference in the eyes. The brow becomes a little furrowed around the eyes. The mouth tightens and closes. And we orient in that direction. Our body becomes stiff. Yep. So at that point, I should call the dog, look at me, and kind of distract them away from whatever it is that they're experiencing. Because the longer I let them look, the longer that duration goes, and the more those cortisol levels release, the closer we get to reaction. All right, let's look at some more early signs of stress signals that escalate into reactions. That way we become a little bit more familiar with recognizing them on the walks and knowing when we should intervene or manage the environment, which we're going to get into later. We're going to see the same reaction 3 different ways. You might not always be in the same orientation or relation to your dog. They might be on your right-hand side. They might be on your left-hand side. They might be behind them. Or they're in front of you. Yeah, you're behind them. So we have the same reaction here in a front view, a side view, and a rear view. So we're going to see the front view first. This is actually the behavior we just saw. She's looking outside at the door at a trigger. She starts actually releasing hormones then. She recognized another trigger right there, and then she was about to escalate into a reaction. Same reaction now from the side view. So here she is looking at that trigger outside. And then she turns and notices a trigger. You can see all sorts of movement as the reaction happens. The ears look back. And here's going to be the rear view. So your head turn, her ears are very far up. You can tell her mouth is clenched and tight by looking at the muscles kind of on the side of her head. I recommend recording your walks. Not you. Let me rephrase that. I recommend having somebody else record your walks so that you can start to observe your dog's body language and noticing, oh yeah, it's a tail that moves right before we start to have big actions, or it's the ears that pop up that really give that indication that we're aware and alert that there's something there. Now that we know what signs to look for, we've got our equipment, we feel comfortable handling that equipment. Let's talk about how to create calm walks. How is it that we can make this experience a little bit better for our dogs? Before we get into that, let's talk about how dogs learn. Dogs do learn in multiple different ways, but one of which is through experience. So if walking is always going to lead to the experience of over threshold feelings and behaviors, well, we've got a good routine going. I know what to expect in the future. So this is why we're getting to that idea of, hey, if it's not going well, we're going to end this experience. Or, hey, if we know that we're going to see a lot of triggers on this walk, we're going to wait until we can go out later. This is why trying to go out more and expecting your dog to get more comfortable is actually not yielding the results that you want, because all we're doing is affirming to our dog, it feels that way and it's going to continue feeling that way, so you should expect this in the future, you should anticipate this. They learn through that experience, they learn through that association. A really good analogy is that friend of a friend that we all have that we don't like, right? Ugh, they're going to be there, okay, right? We always have a bad time with them, I don't want them to come. Already I've got an attitude about myself because they're coming, because they're going to be there. Now, either I can have no experience with them and just stay where I am about how I feel, or I can possibly start having really good experiences. Maybe they have a change of heart and we just start having, heart to hearts. We start connecting and it's one experience. Okay, that was kind of good. It's kind of better. And then the next one, and then the next one, and they start being really good, really good, really good, to the point where I kind of forget that they were ever bad. But if there's a bad one in the middle, that can definitely put me a step back. So it's kind of like a game board where you can either stay where you are, you can take a step forward, or you can take a step back. So if we are where we are and we know that we're going to have a bad time, then that's just going to put us a step back, which is going to make it harder to take that step forward where we need to be really comfortable. We don't want to do that. So no experience is better than the bad experience. So that's why we were kind of talking about decreasing the frequency of the walks, right? So if you go out 6 times a day, maybe only go out twice. Maybe, because decreasing the frequency lowers the likelihood that we can see something on that walk, or that something big can happen on that walk. Same with the length of the walks. If we only go out for 20 minutes, the likelihood or the opportunity of something happening drastically shortens than if we're out and about for an hour, hour and a half, or 45 minutes of something of that nature. Something else that we want to do is be mindful of those walks. We want them to be strategic. Observe when there are quiet times in your neighborhood. Everybody's neighborhood's individual. Do you have, the neighborhood that has all the kids that go to school, and so it seems to be between 7 to 8, everybody's packing up for school and work, and then again at 2 to 3, there's another influx with the kids getting home, and then again at 5 with the parents getting home. Or are you in a very professional setting? We don't have that 2 to 3 block that's totally open. We don't see the traffic during that time. Being observational as to when other people walk their dogs. So if you do live in that neighborhood where people have kids, they got to get the kids to school from 7 to 8. They might be walking 6 to 7. Maybe we want to walk earlier than that, or maybe we want to walk later than that. So observing when it is that your dog's trigger is plentiful in the neighborhood, and then plotting and planning your walks to be slightly avoidant of them, because hey, if walks mean that we're always going to be over threshold, it's always going to be overwhelming. So again, we're going to set that expectation, and we're going to bring those expectations with us on the walk, and it's going to be easier to feel the way that we feel. It's going to be easier to behave the way that we do. Something else that we can do is observe and locate visual barriers on the walk. So we know that having close interactions with the dog's trigger, whether it's a dog, a person, moving items with wheels, loud noises, whatever it is, or having long exposures or frequent exposures will cause more cortisol and cause the dog to go over threshold. So how is it that we have a walk and try to adhere to these pieces that make our dog feel comfortable? What happens if a dog is on the same side of the street coming right at us and we're going to cross the street, but oh no, there's a dog over there as well? How is it that we can help our dog remain under threshold or handle that situation better? Visual barriers. What your dog can't see can't hurt them, right? Ignorance is bliss. So if they're hidden behind something like, say, a parked car, they can't see how close the shark is, right? The shark has to swim right by you. I'm sorry, they got to swim right by you. I don't have any other way for them to go. But I'm going to put this nice steel wall between the two of you. You don't have to see them. They can't even get to you. That's probably going to make you go, okay, I guess, right? Like if they have to come that close to me, that's the best thing we can do. That's what's going to help you remain calm. So using those visual barriers, working around the car. So if there's somebody coming straight towards you, somebody on the other side of the street, walking along the inside of the car, like where somebody would be entering their car and walking your dog that way, is a really good way to avoid that really close interaction with the dog that you're going to pass by on the same side of the street. We have a demo of this. We're not using actual dogs in this demo. We're using humans as our dogs. So here I am, the handler with my dog. We will see another handler with their dog pass by, and we're going to basically play with this car on either side to avoid our dogs having direct eye contact and interaction with each other. You're even going to see me walk up the leash here, and that leash handling. Okay, and I'm going to go around the car. Well, you see on the right-hand side, there's another person with their dog walking. And when I feel as though there's enough distance between them and my dog, I then move back over. So we can watch that again. So here they notice they're coming up. My dog is probably going to react if they keep coming towards me. I'm going to work on this side. My dog cannot see on the other side of that car. And then look at how much distance we're gaining right now. By the time that I pop out on the other side here, that is almost another car's length of head. So sometimes your dog might not react when they pop out on the other side. Maybe they will. Maybe having that close of an interaction is just too much. All dogs are individuals when it comes to experiencing their environment. So when it comes to saying, yes, that's stressful, or no, that's not. So for some dogs, this might be too close. For other dogs, it might be fine. Tailor these methods for your dog. But this is one way that I could avoid not walking my dog, again, dog, right next to the other person's dog, and avoid my dog going over threshold. There are a lot of visual barriers in your neighborhood, whether it be that parked car on the side of the street, whether it be bushes, shrubbery, trees, alleyways, driveways, fence lines, walkways, whatever it is that you need, where you can either create that more distance, or you can create that illusion of distance by creating that visual barrier. Right, so other ways that we can promote calm walks is providing mental enrichment, providing this throughout the day. So enrichment can be puzzle toys, conch for load, like Kongs, sniffing with snuffle mats, anything that is going to allow your dog to perform those natural species-specific behaviors to obtain those natural species-specific goals. So most of the time it's hunting and foraging. So hiding food in some type of a contraption where they use, again, those natural behaviors like digging, gnawing, chewing, licking, whatever it may be, to get to that goal. So we see on the top right, we see some dogs with their nice fun puzzles. It looks like some of them are store-bought, some of them are homemade. Changing it up is definitely something I recommend. Your dog can get real bored. So novelty is really important. Maybe have a couple of activities and then rotate them like every 8 days, if you will, so that it's not the same thing every, on Mondays we got this, then your dog figures it out. But providing some mental enrichment before we go out, maybe kind of a more mild play session. You don't want to get them all excited before they go out for the walk, but kind of releasing some energy before you do go out can really help. If the walk is meant to release energy, but the stress actually creates energy, right? We're going to need something else that actually just depletes the energy. Otherwise, you're just bringing back a dog that is just charged physically and emotionally. Let your dog sniff. This is so important. It's so important. 20 minutes of sniffing equals an hour's worth of physical activity. Mental exhaustion is always going to win over physical exhaustion for your dog. I'm not trying to discount physical activity. I'm not saying don't exercise your dog or play with them anymore. I'm just saying that we tend to do that quite a bit. And we want to start opening that door to a lot of mentally stimulating them and exhausting them in calming ways. And sniffing is that. So dogs can smell over 100 times better than us when they are sniffing on the walk. They can smell another dog, for example, they can smell more than that. But if the dog is male, female, spayed, neutered, what kind of a diet are they eating? How much cortisol is in their urine? What kind of a breed are they, maybe? How long ago did they leave that scent there? All of those except for the breed are absolutely true. And that's a lot of analysis that they have to go through, which is exhausting, which stimulates them more than the physical exercise. Not to mention the physiological, the body effects that breathing has. So it's going to lower the heart rate, it's going to regulate the breathing pattern, and it's going to relax the body. So we talked about how things on the walk is going to make your dog go, and if we know that sniffing makes them go, right, what behaviors are we probably going to get when the dog is, as opposed to, so it's essentially like giving your dog a breathing exercise when they're in a stressful environment or before they're about to enter a stressful environment. It can really help just regulate that causation for the behavior. The really other cool thing about sniffing is that it can increase leash walking. So if the walk, if we shift that culture, as we said earlier, we want to start entering in check-ins. That's what the walk now looks like. Sniffing is also what the walk looks like. We want to enter that into the culture of walking. We do want to avoid on-leash greetings. If your dog is already having a really hard time regulating their excitement or their fear, you don't want to put them in a situation where they have to bottle it all up and try to navigate a situation with another dog. It's a lot for them, and that poor other dog has no idea what they're getting themselves into. Tend to avoid those on-leash greetings, avoid that association that walks do mean that I go over threshold or that I get put into situations that I don't feel like I can be successful in. So until you really see calm reactions from your dog, I would avoid on-leash greetings. All right, so how to create calm walks continued. The training method in a nutshell that we like to promote when it comes to these behaviors is a really fancy training method called desensitization and counter conditioning. We're going to break all that down so you understand what it means. Desensitization means to become less sensitive to. The reason why we want to be desensitizing our dog and then counter conditioning, which means to change the emotional association, to make new associations. The reason why we want to do that is to create new behaviors. So we all know that if we're fearful, we're going to show fearful behaviors. If we're excited, we're going to show excited behaviors. So we need to change that emotional association our dog is having in order to change the behavioral response that they're having. Simply trying to go after a symptom, which is the behavior, and never addressing the root cause is kind of like trying to cure a broken arm with Advil instead of just putting it in a sling and trying to fix it, right? Oh, the pain will go away. That's the only problem. That's the symptom. You can make the symptom go away, but the arm will still be broken. And at some point, the Advil's gonna wear off. And that's not what we want for our dog. We don't want to just suppress behaviors. We want to build new ones. We want to build new ones through new associations. So to desensitize and become less sensitive to something is going to require these three factors that should look familiar: distance, duration, and frequency. So avoid close exposures, right? Once again, if I want to get you comfortable with a shark, do you want to have a close experience with them, or do you want to be far away from them at first? You kind of want it to be something that you barely notice. And then you just slowly start to be like, yep, yeah, I barely noticed it. Now I don't even notice it at all. It happens and I barely hear it. I've grown up here my entire life. So the planes flying over Myanmar, never thought twice about them. I'm desensitized to those. So we also want to be changing that emotional response. So while we're having that exposure that is at a point, that is with very short amount of time, that is with low frequency from one exposure to the next, we want to be adding that food or that praise or whatever reinforcer our dog likes, whether it's their toy or affection, into the environment. You look at the dog, you get a treat. You see the dog, you get, good dog. Most of the time, if people are attending this, though, the dog needs something a little bit more higher value than good dog, right? We need something to really help us feel good. The food is something that really is comforting to a dog. It's the highest value thing that you can offer them. Not only is it comforting, but what we're doing is creating that association. Every time you see this dog, you get a treat. Every time you see that dog or that person or that moving object or hear that sound or whatever it is that is your dog's trigger, you will get a treat. So let's say for conversation's sake, like what we see here in the graphic, the dog's trigger is another dog. So we see in the black pictures, right? We see that trigger. We go over threshold. That's our response. And then in the meantime, what we're going to do is create distance between our dog and that red dog, that trigger. And we're going to then pair. You see that dog, you get a treat. And the dog is now going to go, oh, there's that dog. Where's my treat? Right? That dog's a treat fairy. Obviously, every time I look at them, you pop one out for me. So I'm looking, where's my treat? And if that dog is the treat fairy and it makes your dog get things that they like, well, they don't really want that dog to go away. They want that dog to stay. And what does your dog behave like when they want things to stay? It's probably not barking. It's probably not lunging. It's probably not all those behaviors that you see on leash right now. It's probably more indifferent behavior, right? More just kind of relaxed behavior. And especially if I know that if I look at the dog and then I look at you, I get that treat. That's probably the behavior I'm going to start doing more often and see my trigger and check in with you. And then look for you for direction to feel better. So this is why earlier we were saying that treat it's more so in helping the dog create an emotional association than it is in reinforcing or addressing the behavior. Because as we mentioned, it's not the behavior that we're trying to get at because it's blocked by that cause, right? We gotta get past the cause first in order to get to the behavior. And just so happens, changing the cause, changing the association from stress to comfort is what then minimizes the behavior as well. Going to give you all a visual of what this training looks like. There are multiple different methods. This is just one of them. But this is what it looks like when a dog looks at another dog and gets a treat when you're walking. So we do have a fake dog. The dog I'm walking looked at them. They got a treat. They're looking at me. They look at the dog. They immediately get a treat. They're going to turn with me because we're getting too close. So even I'm not going to push my dog past that threshold. That was really calm behavior, and I want to continue that association. The closer we get to that dog, the better it feels. We're not going to get too close to the point where we stop that good feeling. That would kind of be a half a step back, right? Take that step forward, and that would be like a half a step back. So we can see that again. So the dog looks at the dog. My dog looks at the fake dog, gets a treat. My dog is going to look at the big dog again, and that's going to result in them getting a treat as well. So as you can imagine, when you're on your walks, you notice those signs from your dog, you got your treat ready, you pair your dog seeing their trigger with a treat, you locate that visual barrier, look at the trigger, get a treat, look at the trigger, get a treat. Let's hide out behind the visual barrier before you go over threshold. That was a good interaction. That was a good experience. We're not going to let you go over threshold. We're not going to let it go anywhere from here. And then we're just going to pop out when the thing is gone. And next thing you know, your dog thinks that, their trigger means short exposures, good things happen. What's the big deal? Why have a big reaction? That's what we want. All right, this is so easier said than done. Like, so unbelievably easier said than done. It's important that you all understand the workings behind the training, right? Because it's a frustrating behavior. It's frustrating. So it's really important for you to understand why it's happening, why you shouldn't be just pulling back on the leash, why you just shouldn't be yelling at your dog or putting something on them that could be painful or harmful. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the training is easy. We just want you to once again understand, how to have the safest walk, why the behaviors are happening, how to try to avoid the behaviors from happening and furthering themselves, and a little bit about how to start changing them. But really what we want is for you to engage in formal training so that we're not setting you up for false success. We don't want you walking away from this going, cool, I got everything I can do training with my dog. We want you walking away going, I'm so glad that I have the basis information for how to start training. Now let's work with a professional to make sure that I keep doing what I'm supposed to be doing with my dog to see those results. So San Diego Humane Society has a couple of different training classes to address these behaviors. If the behaviors occur both inside of the house and outside, so if your dog likes to bark at the delivery person, at people coming inside the house, whether it's your guests, or maybe they have some behaviors towards other pets in the house, or like to run along the fence line that you share with the neighbor and their pet. Mat work, reactive rover mat work is where we would recommend you start, and then do reactive rover heel work once you're finished. Reactive rover heel work is our specialty class or 6-week class that is meant to address behaviors that only occur outside of the home on the leash. So if your dog is totally fine, delivery person can come up, anybody can come inside the house. I don't care about the neighbor's dog or any of their other pets. It's just when I get on leash and go outside. Reactive rover heel work is where we would recommend you all start off. You don't have to do reactive rover mat work, but definitely look into these. We also have a walk-in train session. If you're not sure which 6-week class is necessary for you, that's an in-person session where we do an assessment for you. You can find all of these classes at our website, sthumane.org/training classes. Of course, there's other options besides us. There's private training from local trainers in the San Diego and surrounding areas. We have created a trainer directory that features certified and only certified trainers. The link sthumane.org/trainer directory is where you can find that list of trainers. If you do decide that you want to go outside of that list, we have a wonderful lecture, How to Pick a Trainer 101, that was hosted by my wonderful manager, Juliet. And that can walk you through the steps to ensure that the trainer you're choosing is right for you and right for your dog. All right, wrap everything up because that was quite a bit. That was a big bite, right, to take in. Let's go into some next steps. So acquire those appropriate leash tools if you don't already have them. Practice leash handling on your own. Get real familiar holding the leash and handling it. Build loose leash walking and focused behaviors inside the home and outside. Plan that walking schedule. Observe those busy periods. Try to plan for calmer walks. Go for fewer daily walks if you can. Introduce mental enrichment into that daily routine. So don't worry about not going on those walks and not relieving that energy. Once again, mental enrichment is going to do it for you without the stress, without that baggage. Have someone record your walks for you so that you can review your dog's body language. Start to become really comfortable as to those signs where they're aware and alert. You should either start to introduce something that makes them feel good or possibly hide behind that visual barrier or just gain distance in any way we can. review exposures in relation to stress thresholds. So how close were we to the trigger? How long were we exposed to it before we started seeing behaviors? That's also going to really help you and help the trainer you're working with when you do start to work with one. Observe common visual barriers along your walking route as well with that training. And of course, review your leash handling and timing. Practice as much as you can hiding behind those visual barriers to desensitization on the walks. And then, of course, look into a trainer to help you do all of these things because it's a lot. But we can do it. It is something that we can do to make your dog feel more comfortable. Your dog, of course, will pick what environment they're going to be the most successful in and let you know their boundaries. They are individuals. They will all have boundaries, but it is something that we can do to help them feel more comfortable. I know that we've got plenty of questions. And Juliet, if you don't mind actually jumping in and letting me know what hasn't been touched on, what has.
Yeah, hi. So I did some very brief responses to a number of things in the chat, but we can kind of skim through it again.
Yeah. So better to walk by quickly and redirect, or better to have them sit, focus on us with a treat when a dog gets by? Really great question. So sitting is a vulnerable position. It's stationary. So if you can imagine that you are emotionally charged, whether it's scared or excited, you probably don't want to be in that position that makes you stationary. You probably want to have that ability to react. Putting yourself in a stationary position can actually make impulsive decisions happen more. So a really good example of this is the shark swimming underneath you while you're swimming on your back, right? That's a really vulnerable position. You're probably not going to stay in that position very long. You're probably going to go, there's a shark underneath me, and you're probably going to flip over really fast. So it is better to either go the opposite direction, hide the ability to see the other dog or have that interaction with them. Any type of exposure you do have, try to pair it with treats or anything that your dog values.
I'm going to jump in for one that I saw earlier in the chat from Deb. The question is, how do you control your dog when they get overexcited, when they know they're coming up on a house where there is another dog and they start jumping and barking at the fence? We hear that a lot. So if you know it's coming, be proactive. With reactivity training, as you probably guessed, a lot of this is being proactive. So if we know that house is 2 houses away, cross the street well in advance, and just keep your dog focusing on you, reward check-ins, play the wedding march games, and really keep their focus on you as you're passing that home to try and decrease interest in that home, or change your walking route. Don't walk as far as that house. Focus more on sniffing. Play with different things like that. But if you know it's coming and you're able to avoid it, definitely avoid it. Follow-up question right beneath that from Erica is, if we're over a threshold, what do you do if you're too far from home or the car? You don't want to wait there because they're not going to get less stress. So just get home as quick as you can. One of the reasons we recommend doing fewer walks or shorter walks as far as the distance you go from home is to help you avoid those situations. So if you've walked out 5 blocks and you've seen 6 dogs, you got to get home. And that's really hard for your pet. And the rest of your walks that day are going to be super difficult. So doing a 2-block walk where you focus on sniffing and lots of games and training games and enrichment and things like that is much, much easier for those dogs who are struggling on walks, because you have a lot more control over your environment and it's a quicker walk to get home than if you were to, go further out.
There's another question not too shortly after that. It says, my dog who freezes just stops walking on walks fairly often, sometimes right at the start when I still need her to keep walking to go to the bathroom. How can I keep her to keep moving? So if the dog is stopping, not to sniff, but to hyper focus, something you can try doing is the wedding march game. Try to get her to move along with you at your hip. Something else you can do is a treat trail where you just, Hansel and Gretel it, drop some treats on the ground, get her to move along with you. You can make it kind of exciting. Oh my gosh, here we go, and kind of pick up your pace and pick up the tone of your voice, make it really exciting and silly, and see if that will get her to go along with you. But another piece of advice is to kind of note, what is it that's causing the freezing to happen? Is it in a consistent environment? Is it from a consistent stimulus, which is anything your dog can hear, see, smell, taste, or feel? And then start to kind of note where that is and start building those better associations around it, whether it's something you can avoid or something that you can pair with some better feelings so that we don't feel the need to freeze and focus on it. But if they are sniffing, let them sniff.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We had a question about picking up your dog and holding them. This is such a nuanced question. Depending on the context, this can be more arousing for some dogs. So some dogs will see a dog get picked up and are like, oh my God, this is more exciting. I have to go see it. You might get jumped on by that dog, especially if they are off leash, which is always a dangerous situation. Because you're all here to learn about reactivity. I'm betting that many of your dogs don't like greeting other dogs on leash. So even if the off leash dog is friendly, they're a hazard as far as a lot of us are concerned with the more reactive dogs on leash. So if you are picking up a dog, especially if there's an off-leash dog present, that often increases arousal and can be more dangerous. In addition, the dog who's being held might feel more restrained and become more stressed. So there's a lot of really specific to the individual nuances with that, but typically we wouldn't recommend picking up. That said, we have seen successfully families, especially where there's off-leash dogs and they have a smaller dog, pick up their dog and put it on something or in something. So I've heard dogs getting put on top of cars, inside the beds of trucks. I've heard of a dog getting put into a trash can because they just had to get it out of the way from a dog who is off-leash and running up inappropriately. So there's a lot of things we can do. We're picking up and moving our dog out of sight, but we're not holding it in our hands. So again, that's a bit of a nuanced question, but as a general rule, picking up isn't what we recommend in most cases. So another question that came out of this that I do want to address is my dog sees other dogs and their hackles go up. That's the fur standing up along their back. Should I take her to doggy daycares or dog parks? So some dogs don't do well on leash, but do fine off leash. If that's your dog, then that might be fine for them. Maybe on leash, they're just out to go potty and they're not out to make friends. That could be cool. But if you're seeing the same behavior when they are off leash, I would not recommend dog parks and doggy daycares. They are not enjoying that situation 9.8 times out of 10. In the 12 to 14 years I've been dog training, I've known 2 dogs whose hackles go up when they're excited and playing. And even then they were like really highly aroused and excited to be playing. And they were kind of like, this is really exciting. I'm not quite sure how to handle it. So it wasn't like great play. So I would typically say no if you're seeing that behavior off leash around dogs as well. And we have a whole bunch of presentations on dog play and dog park etiquette. You can dig into those also.
Thank you for mentioning. Yes, so when we say to decrease the frequency of your walks, it is not to decrease potty breaks. It is to decrease the long walks that we use for exercise release, energy release. Still take your dog out for their potty breaks if you can. If they have to go outside for a potty break, make it in that like kind of more quiet space as you possibly can, more calming space, so that we're not getting exposed. But thank you, Juliet, for covering that.
I'm like, I know the question is going to come. A question from Scott. We have 2 dogs. Should we start walking them together or separate? Again, that's one of those nuanced questions. Some dogs learn. So dogs like us can learn by watching other dogs behave. For some dogs, that works really well if you have enough distance between them, which will be relative to your dogs. If one dog is super comfortable and one dog isn't, depending on the level of their discomfort, how quickly and how intensely they react, and many other nuances, in some cases, you can use your like comfortable dog as a guide, where your less comfortable dog can like hang back and watch good interactions. And as long as they stay calm, that can be a way that you work with them. It does require a lot of really careful management though, because again, you want to do short walks. You don't want to be walking out far. You have to be watching your dog's signals really closely. And if you're watching the dog in front of you to see how they're doing, you can't also be watching your dog as closely. So keep that in mind, because that takes a lot of like, I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you're doing it with a professional trainer, and or you have a lot of experience training your own dogs, using desensitization style methods, because there's a lot of work that goes into that. So shorter walks, the shorter walking distance or time.
Yes.
So physical exercise is super important for our dogs, yes, but we can get that by playing inside the home. We can burn that out with enrichment. Carrie spent some time talking about that. We'll also send you a whole pile of enrichment resources in the follow-up. We have an entire playlist in a presentation on that topic.
Dogs react to the time of day based on the cues we're learning. I feel like my dog is more reactive when it's dark outside.
It may, so for some dogs, it's a vision thing. If they have cataracts, for example, they see more shadows, so time of day can be more challenging. But it could also be that the way the light quality impacts our dog's vision. they have vision that the most recent thing I read is similar to like a human vision being at like 72/20. It's not real good. So if they are looking at someone who's wearing a lot of darker clothing, or they're wearing something bulky like a big jacket or a backpack or something like that, they have a helmet on, whatever it might be, they may not look as normal or as human. So it could be other things that are influencing their reactivity, not just time of day, although that can be part of it. It could also be that there's other things in the environment happening that are like, stacking up in other ways that are much more, much less noticeable, where when they do react, it's bigger, and it just happens to be that time of day. For our dog who's a rescue from Mexico with Liz, who's hypervigilant all the time, there's a presentation called Success on Leash that talks about the window watching game. That's really good. It's going to help kind of decrease some of that arousal from inside looking out. And I would also recommend our Shy Dog class, which is aimed at reducing fear. So we definitely want to help them feel more comfortable if we can. And many of these behaviors start inside the home, because working on them outside around all those scary things is just way too much. Oh, so with coyotes, picking up is totally fine. Yeah.
You beat me.
Yes.
Literally just put it in the chat. I was like, safety first, definitely the right call. Glad you're okay.
So we have one from Sylvia. One dog is more reactive when they're with the other dog. They could be reading each other's stress signals. So it's kind of like if you're with someone who's like super high anxiety and they're kind of always tense, it makes you more tense. Additionally, if we are tense because we know our dog is more reactive in this situation, or when they're with our other dog, or when they're approaching this house, or whatever it is, our dogs read a lot of our body language. So if we're like assuming the position because we see a dog coming, they're going to feel those signals and get tense as well. And we have presentations that touch on that also.
There's a fun social media trend. It was like freak out and see if your partner matches your energy. Everyone would like just go, oh my gosh, and run out of the room, and their partner would just follow them, even though they had no idea what was going on. Mirror neurons. Someone else is feeling something, you start to feel it too.
I got a direct message from Rosa saying, my dog knows there's a dog coming before I do. They must smell them. Yes, they do.
This is why we went over those signals. So a lot of times folks become conditioned, we become trained to try to find the dog's trigger before they do. But for the most part, they do become aware of that trigger before we do, before we're able to spot it. So recognizing your dog's body language and their signals when they're aware and alert of that trigger is what's really going to help you know when they're aware. And start to intervene, as opposed to waiting until you notice, and goodness only knows when your dog started to.
Carrie, there's a question in there for you at the end there about dogs and babies.
So when it comes to youngins, babies, toddlers, dogs will definitely have usually an emotional reaction. What emotion, we're usually unsure, but it's either excitement, arousal, or possibly fear. Children have all the body language cues and vocalizations of, I don't know what to do with you, right? So children are normally going to be the eye level that is going to make direct eye contact with dogs. That's just how tall they are. And they can't move it, right? And that direct eye contact can be seen as arousing, and it can be seen as something that is threatening. So once again, that reaction is going to determine on the dog whether they see that direct eye contact from the child, who children are rather obsessed with direct eye contact because they are still learners and studying their environment, whether they're going to be really excited or fearful. Children move sporadically. They don't have fine or gross motor skills, and that can be really either, once again, arousing or fearful to a dog. I don't know what's going to happen. That can be, all right, let's play, right? I don't know what you're going to do. Let's flail around. Or it could be like, whoa, I don't know what you're going to do. I need you to stay away from me. And those vocal cords, they can't control them yet either. They tend to be really loud. They're really sporadic. They move up and down. This unpredictability can cause arousal behaviors such as jumping in dogs. Because it happens to people as well, not just youngins. It's most likely just that excitement that the dog is feeling. So once again, that overexcitement, that emotional association is what is driving the behavior we're seeing. So I'm overly excited, and I think that performing jumping behavior is a good way to show you that I'm excited, and I'm hoping that jumping is going to lead to you petting me and looking at me. So my best piece of advice is ask children to not approach directly. Something you can do is kind of tell them to stay where they are. If you have your treats on you, put some treats kind of in the middle of you, walk back, have the child pick up the treat, have them approach your dog, ask your dog to sit. They can give your dog treats. They can toss the treats on the floor. It's one way where if the child really needs to interact with the dog, it's a safe way to do so. But if you really don't feel safe with your dog interacting, I think that opting out and saying, not today, thanks, or she likes it when you blow kisses. That's a really good one to use when you don't want your dog to interact with people, or specifically small people like children, right? They like it when you blow kisses. Wow, we can do that from a distance. But for the jumping behavior, we have a good exercise. It's a little too long to explain right now. But my best piece of advice is to train your dog to sit before you greet them or they greet you.
And then I'm going to jump in. We had a couple questions throughout the night about high arousal and frustrated behaviors and things like that. And the most recent one here is, I think it's from Sarah. My dog is great meeting dogs off leash at the dog park, but she has high stress and reactivity to women in hats in particular. She'll charge up to strange women in the park and bark at them. How can I stop this? So it's harder to redirect because we're not attached. We're at the park, we're off leash. She's not right next to her. She's not as focused, and she's less responsive to things like treats and stuff like that. So I want to ask you a few more questions. I probably don't have time to do right now, but you can email us. The first thing that comes to mind for this and a couple of the other ones that we saw is we are actually just for the first time launching a class called Control Unleashed, which is a series of pattern games by the world-renowned trainer Leslie McDevitt. It's taught by one of our contract trainers, Kelly Viscosi, who's going through her trainer training program. And it's all about reducing high arousal. And it's a class, or it's a series of games that were designed for high impulse or poor impulse control dogs, high arousal dogs, and working like sport dogs. So dogs with like a lot of drive, a lot of go, a lot of like energy, and not always like the knowledge of what to do with it. And because a lot of these dogs are working like in off-leash areas, or they're at home, or they're out on walks, or they're wherever they are, that might be a good one to start with. Again, feel free to ping us so we can chat a little bit more detail about what's going on, because it sounds like there's a few different things that are happening with yours. So it could be that there's a couple different classes that will make sense, because a lot of dogs need more than just 6 weeks to work on this behavior, especially if it's fear-based, or especially if there's other things that are going on. So we can definitely chat about that in more detail, see where it makes sense to start, and which class has the right combinations of things that you need. So you can definitely dig into that further. But there's a lot of options. And we mentioned our classes because we have 6 classes designed around different types of reactivity and fear and high arousal, because all those things kind of fall under that umbrella. And we have more if you count the cat classes. But we have a bunch of classes designed for this topic because it's the most common thing that we do consults on, and we have helpline questions about. So we know there's a lot of nuances and a lot of pieces that go into it, and a lot of work. So we can definitely help answer those questions. The Control Unleashed class, it's a great question.
September, I know I'm getting her. I'm like,
awesome, thank you. And one of the cool behaviors, I'm just gonna plug it because I think it's the coolest thing ever in that class, is they play a game called Look at That, where they're going to like notice something and look away from it, which is why I thought of the hats as being a great one to build on. But Kelly also has a behavior that she trains where you teach your dog to take a deep breath, which is like, it like helps soothe their nervous system. And it's wild, and I think that's magical and amazing. Any last questions? Thank you all for hanging out with us and joining us. And thank you, Carrie, for a fantastic session.
Yes, thank you, Carrie, so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for having me, for listening to me for an hour. You're amazing. You deserve a medal for that.
I think everybody was very engaged. So thank you so much. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you.